we get crazy. We go to someone like Scott Lauber for insight and information. There's a difference. Scott keeps it even keel and will let us know if you, Harry, specifically have jumped the gun in deeming this a World Series quality baseball.
Will you shut up? Don't put words in my mouth.
At Scott Lauber.
Ridiculous.
Is how you follow him on Twitter. Covers the Phillies, of course, for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Scott alongside Harry Mayes, Gabe Kapler. A lot of questions about the team itself. Eytan, Shander, thank you for the time this afternoon.
Hey, guys. How are you?
We're great. Hard not to be after what we saw last night. I mean, that was magical.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. Honestly, I wonder how many people were at home, and if they weren't watching the Eagles game at the beginning, they switched to it pretty quickly. You're down 5-0, you're down 5-1, and it's the ninth inning, and the odds are incredibly against you that you're going to win a game like that. It kind of had to be seen to be believed. And even now you're sort of thinking about it and you're like, how did that happen? So, it's one of those wins you see, every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, you see something like that. And we'll see if they can carry the momentum. I mean, they've had wins this year, nothing like that, but they've had wins this year where you've said, well, that's a good win, whether it was a come from behind win or they beat a good team or something like that. And you say, well, that's what they need. That's the momentum that they need to kind of push them to the next day, and it really has not happened. They haven't won more than 4 in a row all year long. So you say to yourself, well, will this be the one? And who knows? Maybe, you come off a sweep of the Cubs and a bad Padres team is coming to town. Maybe it's the run that they've been looking for. So we'll see.
Oh, it's not Charlie Manuel and the arrival of the former Skip?
Well, I've been calling it Manuel Magic.
Yes, I love it.
In the Inquirer a lot, and I don't know. It's funny. He got there Wednesday, and as of 3 o'clock or so on Wednesday, when we had a chance to chat with him for the first time, he hadn't even really sat and talked to any of the players yet. Certainly nothing in depth about anyone's swing or what was going on with anyone at the plate. And then, of course, they go out and they score 11 runs Wednesday night, and you think that must have been one heck of a batting practice if he could affect that kind of change. And then, last night for whatever it was, 7-8 innings, they really didn't do a whole lot against Yu Darvish. And, of course, everything happens in the ninth. I mean, I will say this. I do think that the move kind of caught everyone's attention. By everyone, I mean, the hitters in that clubhouse. I don't think you're human if you're a guy in that lineup and your hitting coach just got fired and you don't feel at least a little responsible for that. I mean, he doesn't do the hitting, you do. So I think you make a move like this and it's kind of a shot across the bow. Now, then on top of that, it's Charlie Manuel that you bring in. And while none of these guys played for him, I mean, I guess Cesar Hernandez played a couple of games for him very briefly. But while none of these guys played for him and none of them were around the Phillies when Charlie was winning World Series and going to the playoffs every year, they all know who he is. I mean, he walks around the ballpark and, he's sort of Phillies royalty because of what he's done and who he is. And he's the guy that they bring in to replace the hitting coach that they just fired. I mean, if that doesn't get your attention. So, I do think that there's probably a little bit of an initial bounce that you get from making a move like this. Now, does it last? Can it kind of catch on? The more he gets to know these guys, can he help them be more consistent? We'll see. The one thing I will tell you is that he's trying to simplify things in a way that I don't believe very many hitting coaches today, John Maley or elsewhere, do. I think that he's sort of, for Charlie, it's more about feel and timing and rhythm than it is about numbers and data. And I think that he's trying to simplify things for them. He's trying to positively reinforce what he sees. And we'll see, again, if that ultimately makes a difference over the next 6 or 7 weeks.
Scott Lauber, Phillies reporter for the Philly Inquirer, joining us on the Lighthouse Insurance guest line. And you can follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Lauber. Now, Scott, 2 days, Charlie's here. Have you noticed a more aggressive approach, maybe, swinging it at first pitches. It's more like the old school way, like get a good pitch to hit. It might be the first one, and that might be the only one you see.
Yeah, I maybe. It's probably a little still too soon to know that for sure. I mean, a couple of games, and again, he kind of got here on the fly on Wednesday, so I don't know if we've seen enough yet to know whether individual approaches are changing. Like, you're not going to get Rhys Hoskins to all of a sudden, go away from being a patient hitter. That's part of what makes him good. So, he's still going to want to see a lot of pitches, and he's still going to want to work a count and things like that. And look, Charlie's not opposed to that. I think Charlie looks at that and sees plenty of value in working a count and that kind of thing. You just don't want to let too many pitches go that you can do damage with. And maybe some of them have fallen into that trap a little bit throughout the course of the year. We'll sort of see how it goes. Like I said, I think mostly it's an attitude, mentality kind of thing. It's a positive reinforcement thing. Chase Utley tells a great story about Charlie Manuel. He says that he was in a slump at one point, and he was, basically ground ball after ground ball, and was really getting frustrated. And so he rolls over another ground ball to second base, and he runs it out, and goes to the dugout. Charlie says, "That was a good swing. You just missed that one." And Chase is thinking, like, what are you talking about? Like, that was terrible. Like, it's the worst swing I've ever taken in my life. But the more he thought about it, the more he thought, well, look, I mean, Charlie knows what he's talking about, so maybe it isn't as bad as I thought. And, the more guys you talk to, the more you hear stories like that. Like, it's just hitting's tough enough, and when you make it more complicated by delving deeper into numbers when a guy is struggling or trying to fill his head with more rather than less, sometimes it only makes things more complicated. So, I do think that Charlie, like I said, is going to try to simplify things, make things a little easier, take a little of the pressure off, and see what happens.
Is this I don't want to use the term long-term solution, Scott, but is this something where a year from now we're looking at Charlie Manuel nearly a full year into this position, or is this just a temporary, hey, he's here for the August month to see if they could ignite a fire under the player's ass?
He swears it's only temporary, and I believe him because he keeps talking about how he's 75. And, I'll say this, that, I get it, right, that they fly charter planes and they travel and they stay in nice hotels and they make travel fairly easy. But, there's an energy that it takes to do this job every single day for 8 months, and it's the reason why you don't see a lot of 75-year-old people who are on coaching staffs. They're usually retired by then. So for 6 or 7 weeks, I think he can find the energy to do this. I'm not sure that anyone could find the energy to do it for an entire season at his age. So it's hard enough at my age. So, I think that, look, it's 6 or 7 weeks and then they'll see where it goes. But I think at this point I'd be pretty shocked if we're in spring training next year talking about hitting coach Charlie Manuel and his ideas. So he'll have a hand, of course, in shaping their hitting philosophy. He has all along, and maybe he'll have an even greater hand now if this thing works. But I don't think he'll be a member of the coaching staff next year.
Okay, but that begs the question. I think. Let me just follow up real quick, Scott. What happens when Charlie Manuel leaves? Who's there to maintain the vision, and maybe not Charlie's specific vision, but the change in philosophy? Clearly over the last month, his impact, or at least his opening up the eyes of how to approach the plate versus what's been happening the past, 3.5, 4 months.
Well, first let's see how it works out over the last 6 or 7 weeks. Like, if this thing works and they make the playoffs, we're all going to be giving Charlie a lot of credit for that. So let's see how it plays out, but let's go with saying like that the offense does sort of figure it out and carries them into the playoffs. I think if the Phillies are smart at that point, they give Charlie a pretty large say in helping them choose their next hitting coach. But let's also see what kind of how significant the philosophical change is here. The Phillies have tried to downplay that it's going to be a significant change. They're focused more on that they changed the messenger, not necessarily the message, and that's partly true. I think the message is going to change a little bit because I don't think Charlie is nearly as data-driven as a guy like John Maley was. I don't think he's sitting there like looking over video constantly the way a lot of hitting coaches do these days. I don't think he's disseminating stats and bringing them to players and telling them what their launch angle is. He's asking them how their swing feels, and he's watching with his eyes to see where they're making contact with the ball and things like that. So, his approach is certainly different. So we'll see how much the philosophy really does change, though, or whether it's just a different way of messaging that philosophy.
I love the contrast, though, here that we're talking about, like the old school feel, by your gut kind of thing, what you're seeing as opposed to data-driven analytics. I love it.
Here's one thing that I'll say, and I'm writing about this. It's going to be online, I think, later today, and it'll be in the Sunday Inquirer. But, I've talked to some guys who Charlie's worked with in the past. One guy I was talking with the other day was Chris Coast. He's a coach now in Minnesota for a college team and also for an independent league team. And I don't know that this was the case necessarily with the Phillies with John Maley. It might have been. But, one thing you see a lot of these days is that hitting coaches talk a lot about approach and philosophy and how they view how to hit. And it's almost like it's a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. And Coast was saying, like, you'll see – in independent ball, because you get guys from different organizations, you'll see like the number 9 hitting shortstop who's got a very similar approach to the power hitting first baseman. It doesn't make any sense because if a guy can't hit the ball over the fence, he can't hit the ball over the fence. No matter how many times you try to get him to hit the ball in the air, it's not going to go. And Charlie gets that. Like Coast was saying, like he's like, if you remember, I had a horrible swing. This really unorthodox kind of like you'd never teach it kind of swing, but it worked for him, and it got him to the big leagues. And so instead of trying to change him and trying to make him Chase Utley, who had this great, compact, quick swing, Charlie let Chris Coast be Chris Coast, and he worked with what he had, and he helped make that better. And I think Charlie understands the individuality of this more than some people today, that, hitting's difficult, and everyone's different, and everyone's going to come at it from a different standpoint. So the notion of an organizational hitting philosophy is kind of silly when you think about it. It's really what works for the individual.
Yeah, totally. I love that approach.
Big question for you, Scott. This is the big one, and we led up to this in its entirety with everything that we laid out. Do they make the playoffs?
Look at you.
I think it's still going to be tough, and I'll give you 2 reasons why. The schedule in September is really tough. They have a lot of road games, and they haven't been a good road team. So, they're going to have to go and, they have that long road trip to Atlanta, Cleveland, and Washington. That's going to be a huge one. You got to go to Cincinnati for 4 and then New York for 3. I mean, they're on the road almost constantly in September. So that's one thing working against them. And the second thing is just, we focused so much this week in particular on the offense because of the coaching change and Charlie coming back. But pitching, it's still difficult to see this rotation and this bullpen being able to hold it together. I mean, you're not going to win every game the way you won last night. For that matter, you're not going to win every game the way you won Wednesday night when you scored 11 runs.
Right.
There are nights where you're going to have to win 3-2 or 3-1 or even 4-3. And I don't know if ultimately night in, night out, the pitching is going to be good enough for them to do that. But, look, this team all along was built to slug its way to the playoffs, and that's what they're going to try to do here with Charlie being back and all of this. And hopefully they can, they're hoping that they can kind of carry this wave and slug their way in. And, maybe they're starting to find that groove offensively. We'll see.
Well, hopefully. Momentum,
awesome stuff.
They say, is the next day's starting pitcher. We got Vinny Velo tonight. We need we need that 7-inning performance he had a couple of starts ago against Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a couple of hits from him, too.
Right, exactly. All right, Scott, we appreciate the time, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, guys, anytime.
All right,
awesome.
There he is, Scott
That's
Lauber.
Scott Lauber.
Philly Inquirer,